Hello, I just want to make sure that everyone has had an opportunity to take one of the blue sheets to, if you have an interest in submitting a question that you'd like to have us consider to have posed to the candidates. If you have written down your question on the blue card, please hand it to one of the students that you'll find at the corners of the room, and they will bring that up to the stage to be considered. Thank you. We'll be starting shortly. You know, I want to congratulate every single one of you who are in attendance tonight. We're in for a big treat, and I'm very excited about what we're going to experience tonight. I'd like to welcome you. I am Colette Canute, the president of the League of Women Voters of Huntington. As you may or may not know, the League of Women Voters has never supported or opposed a candidate or party. I would like to first begin by thanking Five Towns College for this wonderful set and all of the work that's being done by their students and faculty in making this a wonderful night. Please join me in thanking them. I'd also like to thank the volunteers in our league for all of the work that they have done, not only in preparation for this candidates forum, but for all of the work that we have done since the beginning of the spring in registering voters, educating voters, and now giving you the opportunity to come face to face with our political candidates. So please extend your thanks to the League of Women Voters of Huntington. And now I'd like to thank the candidates so much for your appearance and your attendance. I wish you the best of success with your responses tonight, and we look forward to hearing from all of you. With that, I'd like to ask the president of Five Towns College, David Cohen, to join me on stage to tell you a little bit about Five Towns College and then to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Cohen.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Cohen, and I'm the president of Five Towns College. On behalf of our community of artists and scholars, it is my pleasure to welcome the League of Women Voters of Huntington, the candidates for public office, and our friends and neighbors in the audience to the Five Towns College Performing Arts Center for this Meet the Candidates event. Five Towns College is Long Island's college for music, media, and the performing arts. Through our 8 separate divisions, the college offers more than 30 programs of study, from the associate degree level through to the doctoral level. This evening's event is made possible by the School of Mass Communication, particularly the broadcasting and journalism departments. I would like to acknowledge the hard work of our Mass Communication Chair, Professor Tom Calandrillo. Where's Tom? Somewhere. And his faculty colleagues. I would also like to thank the Mass Communication Division students for sponsoring this event and pulling together to make it happen. You folks make a college president very proud. And now, of course, here's the few shameless plugs for the candidates. The water bottles, if it doesn't violate any campaign finance laws, they're yours to take at the end of the evening. And we also would like to invite everybody back to Five Towns College, to this very stage, where on November 15th to the 18th, we'll be presenting the main stage musical, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. You can learn more about Five Towns College at www.ftc.edu. And now, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, it is my pleasure to welcome Five Towns College broadcasting student, Ms. Star Fuentes.
All right. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
As you take your seats, I'd like to remind you to please turn off all of your cell phones and other ringing devices. Note that this forum is being video recorded by Five Towns College students, It will be available to be seen in its entirety on the League of Women Voters Huntington YouTube channel, and it will be broadcasted during our Cablevision public access time slot. Look for information about that on our Facebook. So with that, I'd like to introduce our forum moderator, Lisa Scott, the president of the League of Women Voters of Suffolk County, ILO. Lisa?
Thank you, Colette, and thank you also to the candidates. Just as an aside, that was an odd choice of theatrical productions, given the stature of our people here on the stage. But let me just go over the rules again. Yeah, now you got it, right? I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Suffolk County, and it's always a pleasure to be a moderator and help the voters of the districts learn more about the candidates. I wish we had about 3 hours. I don't think our candidates wish they were going to sit here for 3 hours, but we've already gotten a lot of really interesting questions, so we hope to cover most of the topics. We can't possibly cover all the questions. The rules of the debate are such. We have a timer, Diane Slavin, who's co-chair of the Voter Service Committee in Huntington. She'll be indicating, Diane, just hold one up so the candidates can see it, okay? We'll do the countdown. Each candidate is being given 1 minute for their introductory statement. Then I'll go through the questions. Since these are all New York State Legislature candidates, all the questions will go to all the candidates. So after we start with the introductions, we'll skip one and then go to the next person and go through a question cycle, then the third person and around. And if you believe it, I will keep track of this, okay? And you each have a red card. You'll be permitted 2 rebuttals if you'd like to add something or further explain something that you think may have been misrepresented about your position. We also have 1 minute for the closing statements. So without further ado, why don't we start with the candidate first on the table, Mr. Flanagan, for your opening statement.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and to Five Towns College. Had the opportunity to know the Cohen family for a long time. This is a hidden jewel, as many of you know, and we're proud to have it in our local community. I've served 32 years in government service, 16 years in the New York State Assembly, 16 years in the New York State Senate, and the last 3.5 years I've been the Senate Majority Leader. And I believe I have a wealth of experience and knowledge about how things work in Albany, what's important to Long Island, aid to education, great higher education, property tax relief, property tax caps, state spending caps, job creation, economic development, taking care of things like opioid and heroin addiction, doing everything conceivable to create jobs, stimulate economic development. My priorities reflect the people that I represent. And frankly, part of my responsibility being majority leader is to take into account the interests of the entire state of New York. But I am, at my core, a parochial Long Islander for the benefit of the people of the 2nd Senate District. Very proud to be here. More than happy to answer questions. And I thank all of you for attending and listening.
Thank you. Ms. Cleary.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kathleen Cleary, and I'm running for New York State Senate in 2nd District. I want to thank everyone, League of Women Voters and Five Towns, for sponsoring this event, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to share my background and ideas for the State Senate. Like many of you, I follow politics, but really got involved more in the last 2 years, where I joined League of Women Voters and then also volunteered with Huntington Town Democrats, canvassing and phone banking for local candidates. With that work, it's made me more aware how difficult it is to run for office, but also how important it is to have a real choice. I've lived on Long Island my entire life. I live in East Northport for 20 years with my daughter, Kate, and my husband, Brian. My background is in contract management. I've managed difficult personalities. I'm very collaborative. I know these skills would work well up in Albany. And I look forward to discussing all the issues tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gaughran?
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you to the League and to Five Towns College. And this brings back memories because this was Burrs Lane Junior High School back in the day when I was in junior high school. We need some changes up in Albany, and that's one of the reasons why I'm running for the New York State Senate. I have been in public office before. I had the honor to represent the citizens of Huntington in both the Suffolk County Legislature for 3 terms and the Huntington Town Board for 1 term, where I was very involved in ethical issues. I'm very concerned that a lot of the things that are not happening in Albany are not happening because of some of the ethical bills that are not being passed. And that's something I'm going to fight for very hard if I have the honor of representing you in the Senate. But I think today I would just like to say that we need to get back to civility in our politics when we say what happened today. And that is something 25 years ago when I was in public office was very important. We had bipartisanship, we had civility, and I hope we can get back to that.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellino.
As a former high school biology teacher for over 20 years, education has always been my passion. It's a top priority for me as a state senator. I've used this position as chairman of the Education Committee to repeatedly deliver record state school aid funding for our local schools. And I've worked hard to recall and roll back the Common Core, which was poorly rolled out. I am the sponsor of a bill to decouple student testing and teacher evaluations, and several important bills to improve school security. As a champion of the natural environment, I chaired the Environmental Committee for more years than anybody, wrote over 100 environmental laws, keeping open space, protecting water, opening the green areas, creating parks. 5 new parks were created under my tenure, state parks that were great, and people can use them. I will continue that, and I look forward to that, and I ask for your support.
Thank you. And those are the 4 Senate candidates. Now, Mr. Williams, the 1st Assembly candidate.
Thank you. My name is Jeremy Williams. Before you ask, I'm 22 years old. I probably have the least experience of anybody up here tonight. The reason I'm running for a chance. I'm running for a chance for the next generation of Long Islanders that are coming out of college, that are looking to set their roots in our community, that are looking to stay in their hometowns, to find a job, to buy a home, start their families. I'm running for a chance for the retired couples that are living on a fixed income, that are being chased out of their home by some of the highest property taxes in our nation. I'm running for a chance for the small business owner that might lose the ability to keep the lights on for those same reasons. I'm a 5th-generation resident of Huntington Station. I love my town. I love my community. It's a beautiful place. I'd like to do everything I can to make it more affordable. I'd like to do everything we can to protect our waterways and our environment and to curb overdevelopment in our town. I'd like to make sure that we get our fair share from Albany, that we all get our fair share, the middle class, the upper class, and the lower class. I thank you for hearing me out tonight, and I hope to have your support.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I'm Steve Stern. I am a husband, I am a father, and it's my privilege to serve as New York State Assemblyman representing the 10th Assembly District. I'm running for re-election to bring my passion and my experience to continue to build on a record that I'm so proud of. A record where, after just a few short weeks up in Albany representing our community, I passed several legislative initiatives and brought back significant resources to protect our taxpayers, protect the water that we drink, protect our community from violent gangs like MS-13 and combat the opioid epidemic, and protect our Long Island suburban quality of life. And with your support, I will continue to provide open, accessible, and responsive leadership, deliver real results for our community, and continue to make you proud. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Raia.
Okay, thank you very much to the League of Women Voters for hosting this event. I'm a proud card-carrying member of your organization, and I thank you for protecting democracy. I've been in office for the past 16 years. I still love my job probably more today than the day that I took office, because Albany tends to be a seniority-based place, and the longer I've been there, the better I've been able to make connections with other elected officials, the governor's office. Over the last 2 years, we have delivered for the middle-class taxpayer, a $4.2 billion middle-class tax cut. I've made cleaning up corruption in Albany a top priority. I voted to eliminate pay-to-play, as well as closing the LLC campaign loophole. Protecting our drinking water and environment is paramount. Preserving our quality education, and as the ranking member on the Health Committee, dealing with the opioid epidemic certainly is one of my top priorities as well. I look forward to a spirited discussion on the issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen?
And I get to go last. Hi, my name's Avrum Rosen. I'm running in the 12th Assembly District. Like Jim, it's strange being back here because I started my life as a youth worker and a social worker and ran the Half Hollow Hills Youth Development Program here and actually produced plays with kids in this very school that they wrote themselves and did all the work on. From that beginnings, I worked as a drug counselor in the schools in this district. I also then went on to law school, and when I got out, I went into, of all things, bankruptcy. But bankruptcy law, not myself, bankruptcy. and gotta watch what you say. But in any event, and I call that economic social work because it was still dealing with people's problems and society's problems. Because bankruptcy attorneys, I became a lot of expertise in healthcare bankruptcies. I represented the nurses union for 28 years in every hospital case. I know what's wrong with healthcare. I'm running because when Mr. Marcantonio was removed from the ballot, I felt that no Republican should go unchallenged this year. I like Andy a lot, but I have some real problems with his positions on healthcare, gun control especially, as well as on some tax issues. And I look forward to discussing them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank all of you for those statements. Ms. Cleary, all right. Cheer them now. Okay, and from now on, we'll withhold any applause till the closing statements. Ms. Cleary, you'd go first now, and we'll cycle around. So, Mr. Rosen, that was only last once. Okay, you'll keep going. We want to talk about issues and your positions and your plans and your accomplishments. So the first issue we have a question on is health. The question is, with over 4.3 million people now enrolled, New York State reports that there was a 19% increase in the number of people covered by the Affordable Health Care Program. Given the federal government administration's move to change ACA, what responsibility does New York have to protect the medical coverage that citizens who currently use this program have? Also, if you would include your position on universal single payer or Medicare for all in New York State.
Okay. So I'm a supporter of single payer, and I believe that it really should be covered at the federal level, which would be just more advantageous to everyone in the United States than to do state by state. But that being said, we can no longer wait on the federal government to move along with this, so I support New York Health Act in New York State. We have many people that aren't covered, and people can go into bankruptcy paying their healthcare bills. Right now, we spend billions of dollars. It's inefficient. The money goes towards administrative costs instead of care, and it also goes into profits. Again, could be done for care. We need to be able to remove the obstruction that's going on here in the New York State Senate, where we need to be talking about having health care for all New Yorkers.
Thank you. Mr. Gaughran?
Well, one of my concerns is Washington, as we just saw with the change in the federal tax code limiting our ability to deduct our state and local income taxes to just $10,000. I fear that the next thing that may come down is a reduction significantly in aid for health care and perhaps even a block grant program that wouldn't factor in the health of the citizens, but just based on numbers. And I'm concerned about that. So I do support the New York Health Act, but I do think it is important that in implementing it, we quantify the money in the system right now that taxpayers are paying. One of the biggest costs to taxpayers is when individuals who do not have insurance show up at the hospital, and then we pay that bill. And many of those people who show up are now there with serious health issues that if they had health care in the beginning, particularly children, perhaps that could have been taken care of earlier.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellino?
Yes, excuse me. The best way to protect people, the best way to serve people is to keep New York State on a spending diet so that we keep our ability to take your money, your tax dollars, to a minimum. That leaves more money in the public's hands, in your hands, so that you can spend it on your needs as you see fit. You're the best ones to deal with that. You're the best ones to know what your needs are and what your expenses will be. And I'm for keeping the money in your hands so that the state doesn't take any more than it absolutely needs to run state government, and to make sure that we are operating at the most effective and efficient rate that's possible. So in that basis, it's a matter of, again, not taking any more of your money than the state absolutely needs, leaving it in your hands so that you can spend it. You know best how to spend your money and what you need to keep your family safe and healthy and your well-being.
Mr. Williams?
I largely concur with Senator Marcellino. I believe that single payer would be detrimental to the financial state of New York. It would bankrupt us. We're in a very bad financial situation as is, and I believe that the individual knows how to best spend their money. So I do not support single payer in New York State.
Okay, Mr. Stern.
This is, I think we would all agree, if there is going to be movement on health care, it would be much better done at the federal level. Given that we are all experiencing an absolute failure of leadership at the federal level, I think that in the state of New York, we have no choice but to lead the way. We already pay. There is a health care tax, a significant health care tax, in every single thing that we do. In my experience as a Suffolk County legislator for 6 terms, I can tell you that close to half of the entire budget of the county is on legacy costs, mostly including health care. Just think of all of the things that we can and should be doing at the local level if we weren't all burdened as taxpayers with this health care tax that we are all paying. That's why I support the New York Health Act, because continuing the status quo is simply unacceptable, because it is unsustainable and is going to have a detrimental impact on all of us going forward. I hope you would agree with me. I want to see my doctor for more than 3 minutes at a time. And I want to have quality health care that's going to protect me and my family. We can no longer support a system where our older neighbors are choosing between their medications or their meals.
Thank you. Mr. Raia?
Thank you very much. As the ranking member on the Health Committee, I'm infinitely familiar with the New York Health Act. I've been studying it for 15 years because the legislation is that old. I agree with our governor, Governor Cuomo, who says this is a nice talking point, but single-payer health care on a state-by-state basis is impossible. State of Vermont tried to do it, relatively small state, and they failed. California didn't even take a vote on the budget. A couple of things that, come to mind in talking about the New York Health Act is it's going to cost $200 billion to implement in the first year. That will double a lot of taxes for a lot of people. In addition, 175,000 jobs will be lost. 2,000 of them very well could be in the 12th Assembly District. I'm in favor of resurrecting Family Health Plus, which is a program we had to give up when the ACA was implemented. But now that that restriction has passed, we do have the ability to insure everybody in New York State. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Rosen?
Thank you. Well, this is where 30 years of working in the health industry comes in. I'm not a supporter of the New York Health Act as it presently is there. I've read the RAND report. I've crunched the numbers. The problem is it relies on high-income New Yorkers not having left the state. I think they already have because of the tax cuts, and I won't vote for something that we can't pay for. That said, I think there are approaches. I think the saying you don't want to take people's money. People can't pay for health care. I'm the only person here, I think, who runs a company. My family rates went up $800 a month just now for my people. So that's $800 a month that I have to come up with. I have some different ideas on it. I think there are other ways to impose taxes through some things that were taken away on services. I think we should look into doing a regional plan with Connecticut and New Jersey, because the #1 place to cut is to go after the pharmaceuticals. And if you had 3 states, that's 40 million people, being able to negotiate pharmaceutical rights, you could save that $200 million, probably comes down to 100, and people are spending more than that now. So it can be done, but it's got to be worked on, and it has to be well thought out. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan?
Yeah, when I served in the Assembly, Dick Gottfried was the sponsor of universal health care or single payer back almost 30 years ago. So this bill has been around in various iterations for approximately 30 years. I don't support it as it's presently constructed. I concur with many of the comments just offered by Mr. Rosen. And I think if you look at the state of New York, we don't wait for the federal government. We have acted long before the federal government on many occasions. And if you look at our Medicaid program, whether it's right or wrong, we have over 6 million people enrolled in Medicaid in the state of New York. And we've done so in ways that are advantageous and ways that are giving us challenges and struggles. So the pharmaceuticals is one component, but those costs are coming under control. We've moved to a Medicaid managed care model, which is much more beneficial. And people who are on Medicaid, it's not perfect, but I know people who are on Medicaid who have much better health plans than people who have private health insurance at, of course, much lower costs. I do not support single payer, and the state of New York will not wait for the federal government to act proactively or reactively.
Thank you. The third topic we want to cover is a question on education. We'll start with Mr. Gaughran. Eliminating disparities in the resources available between grades K through 12 public school children living in lower income and higher income communities is complicated. What solutions do you propose to address this problem as it exists for both school children and taxpayers? And please add whether you support or don't charter schools and their role in public education.
Well, I do not support funding charter schools with our public tax dollars. I'll answer that first. We have some of the greatest public schools here on Long Island, and I want to keep it that way. And what I would like to do is see that if we can fund some of the schools that do not have as much resources to bring them up to the level of some of the best schools that we have now. And one of the ways I think we can do that is we need to gradually move away from the property tax being the primary funding source for our schools and move towards state funds, which would be more income tax and sales tax. And I think with the Trump tax plan that is limiting state and local income taxes to $10,000, that I think there might be the appetite now to gradually start reducing the property tax bill by bringing more money in from the state, which will then also help with the issue as the questioner raised.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellino?
Bringing in more money from the state means taking more money from you. It's tax dollars. We don't manufacture the money. We don't print the money. We take it from you through our taxation. So the more we bring in as a state, the more we're going to have to take from you at the state level. I'm not in favor of raising your taxes any more than they already are. We're overtaxed as it is. We do not have any charter schools in the 5th Senate District. And there's a reason for that. The public is satisfied with the public schools as they exist. The school systems that exist in the district are working well and are working with the community, and people are happy with that. Where you find charter schools is where you find people who are not happy with the current public schools and are looking for alternatives. And by the way, charter schools under the law are public schools and are entitled to some aid. So that's something we have to be careful about also. But I'm not in favor of increasing charter schools. I am in favor of maintaining our public schools, and I've done so by increasing aid to education by over $1,500 per pupil, and I will continue to do that if I'm permitted to stay in the state Senate, and I'm hoping you'll do that.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Thank you. As the person on the stage that's closest to the public school system, I'm a product of the South Huntington School District and a fresh product of the SUNY system through Stony Brook University and Binghamton University upstate. We do have one of the best public education systems, I believe, in the country. I think our extracurricular programs are incredibly important to maintaining that. I think that we need to ensure that every school has enough funding for the arts and extracurriculars. These are the programs that keep youth away from gangs and crime. Like we said, there are no charter schools in the area. That being said, they are public schools by law, so they should be afforded aid. However, I think that strengthening our public schools is the most important thing that we could do, and especially the arts and extracurricular programs that we offer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
I am a very strong supporter of our public schools. I am a product of public schools. My children are products of public schools, and I'm a very strong supporter of the hardworking men and women that teach our children. I am adamantly opposed to utilizing our taxpayer dollars to support charter schools on Long Island or anywhere throughout New York State. Those are our tax dollars that need to be better spent on our public education system. But let me agree with Jim Gaughran that the answer to your question, I believe, is to work to eliminate the property tax as the way we fund our public schools here locally. It becomes a tremendous and unacceptable burden going forward for too many of our neighbors, some of the most vulnerable in our community, some of our older neighbors that unfortunately are being forced out of their homes because of the inability to keep up with rising property taxes. There is a better way to fund our schools, which goes to better equity, better parity, and that's what we need to seek going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Raia?
Thank you. I'd like to talk about some of the successes we've had. In the last 2 years, we've had record increases in aid to education, over $26 billion. It's a 3.4% increase. Foundation aid has increased, and that's what our local school districts rely on the most. I have been against charter schools since their inception, debating against them on the floor of the Assembly. You only see charter schools where the local government is not properly funding education, which is why you see them all in New York City. We contribute 80% to the cost of education. New York City contributes less than 50%. When they match us, then we can have a legitimate conversation about whether or not we have charter schools. We've also done a lot of good, not just with our local schools, but our colleges as well. We're making it more affordable for people to attend a state school. We've increased TAP, we've increased Bundy aid. All of these things, I hope, help New York State be the premier education state.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen?
There were two questions there. I'm going to try to answer both of them in a minute. My wife is a director of guidance at a school district adjacent to here and has worked in 2 other ones here, so we talk about this about 2 hours every night. The charter schools are anathema to having unified public education, because what they do is they skim off the kids that are easy to educate, by and large, in a lot of places. The ones that do exist should be mandated to take as many ESL students and as many handicapped students and as many special ed kids as the other schools do. And they don't do that, leaving the harder kids to educate on public schools. So it's much worse than that. So I think I am categorically against funding them. And I think the fact that funding did not get through this past time in the Senate because of pressure from hedge funds to deal with that was a disservice to us. The other thing I would address on property taxes, the most regressive tax in the world. We provide services. We're being attacked by Washington on a lot of bases. We have services that the rest of the country needs. We should come up with ways to tax them to take the burden off real estate taxes. Thank you. I'll get back to that more later.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan?
Yeah, I think there's a direct correlation. First of all, we need to maintain the property tax, and we need to make it permanent. That's helped control spending at all local levels of government, including at the school district level. Second of all, I am completely opposed to moving toward more of an income tax-based funding of education, because people on Long Island make more money than other parts of the state. We already pay a disproportionate share of taxes. If we move to that model, you're going to pay more, and other people are going to be paying less, and that's not equitable. There's got to be some balance. It's very simple. You create jobs, you drive revenue into the state of New York. The more revenue you generate for the state of New York, the more money that's available for aid to education. A lot of fallacy out there. Right now, we drive money to high-needs districts at a disproportionate level. In this year's budget, the new money that came into the budget over 70% went to high-needs districts. Charter schools are public schools by law. I support charter schools. The teachers' unions have run charter schools throughout the state of New York, and right now there are over 80,000 children on waiting lists trying to get into charter schools because their parents are dying for those children to have a chance at a quality education, whether it's in the city of New York or any other part of this great state.
Thank you. Ms. Cleary?
I have to agree with John Flanagan. We do send too much money up to Albany, and then we get back from here on Long Island. And schools are one of our biggest draws here, but we can't continue to pay the majority of our school funding through property taxes here on Long Island. We need to come up with other ideas and other avenues of revenue. I am opposed to charter schools, and I don't believe that we improve school funding by siphoning money off from public education into charter schools. We do deserve the best education for our children, and we have to think of other ways to fund our schools. Property taxes are not working. We've been talking about this, I think, for probably 30 years now, that we can't sustain it, and it just gets worse. Our elderly and senior citizens are not able to afford their taxes, and it's become very difficult for people to buy new homes and afford the property tax we have here on Long Island.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marcellino, the next set of questions starts with you. It's said often that diversity makes for a more thriving community, and I'm thinking now of age diversity. We have a diverse group right up here. Yet the
What do you mean by that?
I'm looking at the gentleman next to you. But it's also great that we're having this at a college and not in a general population setting. So for the young people who are graduating or will be graduating from Five Towns College and throughout Suffolk County and your districts, what's one piece of legislation that you would support or introduce if you're elected for the next term that would keep young people in our communities and help them thrive?
I would introduce legislation that encouraged the creation of jobs. Young people who graduate from this institution are going to be looking for a place to work. If they can't find it here, they're going to go someplace else, have no choice. So we have to bring jobs onto Long Island. We have to bring good paying jobs onto Long Island. That means you provide tax incentives. That means you create the infrastructure for these jobs and for businesses to come here. We must make sure that we keep our young people here, and they're not going to stay here if there's no future here. We must create that future by creating the jobs, bringing employment to this district, bringing businesses to this district that will create these jobs so that they will stay here and they will want to work and bring their expertise here. We want them to live, work, and play and raise their families right here in the town of Huntington, in the 5th Senate District, or the town of Oyster Bay, which I also represent, the north shore of that. So it's imperative that we create these jobs, that we create the incentives to bring businesses here so that our young people stay here. And anything we can do that does that is key to it all. Cutting taxes and making sure that people have the ability to stay here.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
After graduation, most of my friends moved down south. North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Florida. These are all states with far cheaper property taxes, much less barriers to first-time home ownership, and a much better environment for job opportunities. What we have on Long Island is a very unfriendly environment for young people. I think the first thing that I would do, if elected, is I would seek to create a public-private partnership. Find the highest paying employers on Long Island. Right now, the largest volume employer is the government. I don't believe it should be like that. I believe that private enterprise affords us the best quality of life. So I'd like to bring the largest employers that we could find, bring them to the table, ask them, where are your needs? Do you need kids in STEM? Do you need kids in the arts? Do you need kids in education? Fast track the application process between the SUNY, CUNY, and private school system and get kids employed right away. I think also making the 2% property tax cap permanent would do wonders in keeping young people on Long Island and giving them a chance to actually live here. Why would you be paying $12,000 a year on a home that you could buy in North Carolina for much cheaper, paying $1,200 a year, and you have a much better job? The businesses state shop. They go and they find out where is the cheapest place to operate, and unfortunately, that's not the case in New York.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
Yes, I have had the opportunity through the years, certainly in my 6 terms in the legislature, to speak with a lot of our young people, and of course they will say that the biggest challenges are housing that is affordable and good quality jobs. Downtown revitalization and the infrastructure to serve those downtown areas that our young people want to be a part of is vitally important. That's something that I worked on for years and years in the legislature, and many of our downtowns have experienced fantastic success because of the infrastructure improvement and the support that it's received from our local level of government. But I can answer your question with 2 legislative initiatives that I'm looking forward to introducing if I am privileged to return to the New York State Assembly. The first is a legislative initiative called Internship Apprenticeship Long Island. That will be a local effort for our experienced workers to develop strong supportive relationships with your young people, particularly those coming out of school. In addition, I'm looking forward to the establishment of a boomer corps and utilizing the talents and the experience of our older workers who might be transitioning, developing additional skills, and sharing their experiences with some of our younger workers. Those are the kinds of partnerships that I think our young people are looking for as they create and begin their careers here on Long Island.
Okay.
Assemblyman Stern hinted towards downtown revitalization, which I assume means high-density housing and transit-oriented developments. I can tell you as a young person, not myself, not any single one of my friends and colleagues want to live in a small apartment near a train station where you're paying perhaps $2,500, $3,000 a month, even if it's $1,500 a month. When you're graduating making only $30,000 or $40,000 a year, and you have almost half of your income going towards rent, the cycle is continuous. You're not saving for a 20% down payment on your home. You're not able to join your community when you're living in a cycle of renting that seems unending. What we need to reduce property taxes so we can allow our young people to stay on Long Island, not in apartment buildings.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Raia, your turn.
Thank you. There is no easy one legislation that's going to solve this problem. The first thing we should do, though, is make sure when our young people graduate college that they have as little debt as possible so they can start off investing that money. We've done a lot over the last 2 years. The Excelsior Scholarship Award provides a free college tuition if you attend a SUNY state school and you meet all the other requirements. We've increased TAP, we've increased Bundy Aid, we've increased the community college base aid. We're trying to make college as affordable as possible, so when you graduate from a New York school, you have an incentive to stay here. As far as the cost of living, I have an accessory apartment, and that's the only way I can pay the bills, and I've toyed with the idea of possibly offering a tax break to those individuals that either rent to our senior citizens or our young people in an effort to keep both of them here on Long Island.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen?
Thank you. You know, when I first ran for the Assembly in 1996, my joke back then when my kids were little was I'd like them to have a plan to stay on Long Island that didn't involve me dying. And they're both grown and they're not on Long Island. But seriously, you want legislative proposals? I have 2. We should give a New York State tax credit for student loan payments to people who come back. And for people who are in the STEM areas, it should be increased. We did it years ago with student loans. We used it as an incentive to get teachers in inner city schools. We used loan forgiveness all over the place. New York should also set up a fund for people who come, who want to stay and work here, where we will refinance their student loans with them and give them low rates and extended times or forgiveness over time to give them the ability. You get out of college, you got $300,000, $200,000 in student loan payment. You can never buy the house. There are ways to financially incentivize them to stay in very concrete ways that will actually probably add to the economy in the long run and not cost us any money. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Flanagan?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot talked about in this area. I believe a significant expansion of the TAP program, which is a tuition assistance program, which goes really right to middle-class families more than anyone else, who generally are in the most dire need. I concur completely with the notion of helping to eradicate or reduce or eliminate student debt, which is growing by leaps and bounds, and it gets exponentially worse when you're going to a private college or university, no matter what the quality may be. So I think we need to find ways, and you can provide incentives for students. If you stay in New York for 5 years, we'll help give you loan forgiveness. If you happen to work in an underserved area, we can give you loan forgiveness. If you happen to go into a specialized area, working with adults with developmental disabilities, we can do the same type of thing. There's a lack of synergy and collaboration between elementary and secondary education and higher education. Combine those two, and there's not enough effort being made with the business community. I'll give you a quick example. I've traveled all over the state. I was in Rochester a little while ago. They say we have plenty of good jobs. We just don't have people with the requisite skills. The people who want to hire the good people need to be talking to the people who are educating them to tailor those programs so that when these kids come out, it's ready-made, whether you start at community college or you're already walking into a good-paying job.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Cleary?
Yeah, so student debt is keeping children from graduating. Graduating with student debt is stopping them from moving on into adulthood. But we do need more jobs here on Long Island that'll be able to afford them to move on and move up. But I also disagree with what was said before about young people wanting to live in apartments. Young people don't want to move right into a house. I think they need to have more freedom and to decide what they want to do. It gives them a freedom to decide where they're going to live on Long Island, where they're going to decide to raise their family. And I think low-density housing near infrastructure and trains would be able to help students find a place that they want to live, move back to Long Island, and stay here near their families. I agree that we need to have jobs and education need to be matched. We have students that have this excellent education, but are the jobs here that are matching them. We want them to stay here, so we have to talk both about that, about having jobs for them to come to and places for them to live. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Gaughran?
Well, going last, I agree with a lot that has been said. But one of the things I want to add is, there's a lot of state grant money that's thrown around. And one of the things I would like to do, and specific legislation I would like to introduce to deal with this, is just try to see if we can focus more of this grant funds towards incentives to try to help our young people with jobs. One of that is we've got some of the greatest public and private colleges here on Long Island, and we have some great institutions, Cold Spring Harbor Lab, Brookhaven National Lab, just to name a couple, and some great private companies. I would like to see some of these grants going towards trying to marry the college, the kids, with the future employment. And the other thing that we need to do as well is we have to recognize that not everybody's going to want to go to college. So I think we need to do more in terms of the state incentivizing programs for young people out of high school so that they can find good paying jobs and stay here on Long Island.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Williams, this one starts with you. There have been a lot of talk in the press about women's rights and equality of the sexes. What are your thoughts on this issue, and what ideas do you have to assure equity for all New Yorkers, regardless of their gender or gender identity?
Sure, you mean in the workplace?
No.
Oh, just in general? Mm-hmm. Well, I believe obviously in the equality of all people. I think that we've done great strides in ensuring that women are paid equally in the workplace in New York State. I'd like to see that continuing. I'd like to see perhaps some programs for women in STEM, in science, technology, and engineering and math. It's a generally male-dominated field in the colleges. So I'd like to see some more scholarship money going towards women that would pursue this course of education, course of study. I think that a woman's ideas might be a little bit better than a man's that's set in such an abstract way in engineering, math, and the sciences. I'd also like to make sure that we are representing women, obviously, in our in government. So I'd like to make sure that we can also incentivize, female participation, both at the local, state, and federal level. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stern.
Yeah, thank you. So much of what I do in my personal life and my professional life and as a representative of our community comes from the values that I've developed over a lifetime, surrounded by strong women. Strong women at home, strong women in the workplace, strong women in my workplace. I strongly support equal pay for equal work. And I've also had the privilege through the years of spending a lot of time in our schools, and I can tell you that so many, and it's wonderful to see, so many of our young people that are winning Coca-Cola awards and Siemens awards and developing, some of the brightest minds in STEM and the future of technology are our young girls. And that's really wonderful to see and needs to be supported. But I think that equality really also comes from the ability to make your own healthcare decisions, which is why I am a strong supporter of women's health and reproductive rights and will always be a strong supporter of a woman's right to choose.
Thank you. Mr. Raia.
Thank you. For a number of years, there's been the Women's Equality Agenda, which has been 10 points ranging from slavery to pay equity. It runs the gamut, and I've been proud to actually co-sponsor 9 of those which have passed. We can have a discussion on the 10th platform, which is a codification of Roe v. Wade. It's something that I could support if there were some substantial changes to some aspects of the legislation. As many of you know, I was raised by my mother, our town clerk, Joanne Raia, with my sister, and sharing a bathroom with 2 people. You learn a lot about women's issues, needless to say. And my mother's always taught me to respect women, and they should have an equal chance to achieve everything that anyone else has. And I've been proud to support numerous pieces of legislation that eliminate that glass ceiling and many other things that give women the opportunities they deserve.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen?
Well, I'm not going to touch that last comment. But this is a little bit where the gloves come off, because this is where I really disagree. Andy has voted against equal pay almost every time it's come up. He's voted against codifying Roe v. Wade. He voted against making conversion therapy illegal on minors, all right? He voted against a couple of times gay people from being able to adopt, and then he skipped 1 vote when it came up another time. He has, if you go through his record, this is one of the most consistent places where I do not think he is with the mainstream of the people that he represents, and I would be, because I would vote for all of those things. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan?
Yeah, I think if you look at
I'm sorry. We have a rebuttal. And
Yeah, you knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, 30 seconds, Mr. Raia.
Thank you. Most of the bills we vote on in the State Assembly are one-house bills. We vote on them over and over and over of them year in and year out. Those bills change. Mr. Rosen had said I voted against a number of bills. Actually, if you look at my latest voting record, I have voted for all of them, including the conversion therapy. So, as President Obama, he was against gay marriage for the first 4 years of his term, and then he evolved on the issue. Well, in Albany, you can evolve on issues too, and I have done just that.
Mr. Rosen.
We'll be done after this. I heard the line before about comparing it to President Obama, and it's a good line, except at some point, I think the people of this district deserve someone who's going to lead and not follow, and is going to be in the forefront of these issues and trying to address them up front and not get dragged to doing things when they have to. And that on this and some other issues, which is, I think, what's happened, either for party reasons. I happen to think Andy's heart is in the right place, but for political reasons, he didn't do things, and I don't have those same constraints on me. Thank you very much.
Mr. Flanagan, your turn now.
Yeah, I'm going to add my voice to some of what Assemblyman Raia said about the 10-point agenda that has generally been referred to as the Women's Equality Agenda. The Senate has passed all 9 out of the 10 planks in there. That has to do with equal pay for equal work, sexual harassment, domestic violence. There are a wide variety of factors that are involved. Very proud of working with Senator Marcellino and my colleagues on legislation like that, advancing things that I think are important to all people in New York, but to women in particular. And I also think if we look at this, there's a program in New York which most people don't really know about, but it's basically called MWBE, Minority and Women Business Enterprises. We have incentives in the state of New York, and we provide opportunities specifically for female-owned companies to get a competitive advantage, to make up for some of the competitive disadvantages that have been around for a long time. So we pay close attention to that and work on these issues constantly. I would add, too, that the more we do to create jobs, that's good for everyone, particularly women all across the state of New York.
Thank you. Ms. Cleary?
So yes, I'm for women's equal rights. And as much as I like all the men that are up here, I wish there were a couple of more women with me. So I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I think that making this step and doing some other things, it's great to see women choosing roles that maybe that they haven't done in the past. And I also want to talk about how I am supportive of the Women's Reproductive Health Act. I think it's very important that women have control over their bodies and their health care. I'm also supportive of gender. I'm against gender identification discrimination. And I also think that we need to look into more of a maternal mortality. I think it's a very strong issue, important issue with women's health care, and that is very important to women's rights. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Gaughran?
Well, the work at the state to make sure that all our policies conform to equal pay for equal work, there's a lot more that needs to be done and across the board in all departments and all aspects of our society. So I would support an expansion of that. I also support codifying Roe v. Wade because I am fearful that with the recent Supreme Court appointment of Mr. Kavanaugh, it is very possible that the Supreme Court will vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. And if they do, then we revert to a 1970 law that puts it in the penal code. And I don't want to go back to the day when women and their doctors have to fear going to jail because they want to exercise their reproductive rights. And I also agree with Kathleen Cleary. I support the gender legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellino?
Roe v. Wade is the law of the land, has been for many, many years. There are no cases coming through the courts that I'm aware of, and I've asked, are there any that are percolating up that may rise to the Supreme Court level? There are none at this current time. Roe v. Wade is safe. It is the law in the state of New York. I certainly would not vote to change it.
Thank you. At this point, we'll start with Mr. Stern. It's on environment. Number one, we have a single-source aquifer as our water supply. It's being more and more challenged all the time. We have die-offs with fish. We have stronger and stronger storms wreaking havoc. And through all of these together, you end up with saltwater encroachment and all kinds of things. If you're reelected, what should New York State government be doing to combat all these current concerns in environment?
Preserving our precious environment is one of my very, very top priorities, and New York State does have an important role to play and needs to be more aggressive, actually, in playing that important role going forward. In the Suffolk legislature, where I served for many terms, I was involved in legislative initiatives that required taking into account the impact of climate change when it came to development. In addition, for decades, really, our sole source aquifer had been under attack because of what we pump into the ground, and that's due to the lack of sewer infrastructure. About 70% of Suffolk County to this day remains unsewered. It took new leadership at the county level of government to begin the process after decades of being dormant, to raise awareness, to develop the plans, to come up with the blueprints on where the pipes are going to go. And so now going forward, I'm actually very proud of the fact that my very first legislative initiative that I sponsored and passed in the New York State Assembly had to do with funding the Clean Water Fund to provide the funding to local municipalities to preserve the integrity of the water that we drink.
Thank you. Mr. Raia.
Thank you. We've had a lot of accomplishments on this. As a member of the Environmental Conservation Committee, I take great pleasure in working with the chairman, Stephen Englebright. But as far as the environment, $2.5 billion for clean water infrastructure projects in the last 2 years, $75 million to replace and update cesspools and septic systems. I'm proud of my 100% rating with the EPL because I, as a Republican, one of the few Republicans to vote for the Climate Community Protection Act, and I've been publicly recognized for that. $600 million for the Environmental Protection Fund, funding for air and lead quality in schools, and I was happy to join with my colleagues in supporting legislation to ban drilling, oil drilling off of our coast.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen.
This is something I have a little firsthand experience with. I live in Centerport right on the harbor, and right after I bought my house, it got wrecked in Hurricane Irene, and I had to raise it. And so I've kind of lived this, and I see every storm or every heavy rain what goes into the harbor. So it's kind of personal with me on a lot of levels. There's a lot we can do. We've done some stuff, but we haven't done anywhere near enough. We need to start thinking about different technologies. We have to start thinking about permeable roadways to try and deal with it, because especially along the North Shore on the terminal moraine, where you've got old summer communities with absolutely no stormwater drainage at all, and it just pours into the harbors. We need to work on that. There's that to be done. There is a lot of work to be done on, I know Jim will talk about the new technologies on cesspools, so I'll leave that to him. And we need to come up with other ways of paying for it, and we also need to stop being quite so lazy about it ourselves and change our own habits. And I think government can have a bully pulpit to be doing that as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Mr. Flanagan.
Yeah, a couple of different things. I just want to go back very quickly on women's health. We had over $6 million in grants secured by the Senate. Senator Hannan, the chair of the Health Committee, helped formulate the distribution on that. And I supported paid family leave, which, while it applies to everybody, was overwhelmingly considered a woman's issue in the sense that they are still the primary caregiver in many situations, whether it's on the early stages of life or the latter stages of life. With regard to the environment, Assemblyman Raia ticked off a wide variety of things. I'm very proud to work with Senator Marcellino on issues like brownfields. He chaired the Environmental Conservation Committee for years. Record investments in the Environmental Protection Fund, record investments in water quality and protection. We pushed this year, the Senate Republicans, for a $5 billion bond act. When we go back, I have every intention of reintroducing that with my colleagues. The governor rebuffed us, had no interest in doing it. We did do the $2.5 billion, but I have secured over $50 million in sewer grants for the district that I represent just over the last 2 years, and that is extraordinarily important for stormwater runoff, economic revitalization of downtowns, and it is exceedingly boring, but it is unbelievably important.
Thank you. Ms. Cleary?
So when I'm not running for state senate, I'm a horticulturist for New York State Parks. I deal with flooding issues down in one of the gardens that I manage, and I need to redesign it in order to bring in native plants in order to deal with this storm surge and flooding. Since Superstorm Sandy, we've been dealing with sunny day flooding. We need to be able to redesign some areas that are on Long Island and that we're having problems with. One of the bigger issues, too, is nitrogen's coming into our waters. We need to work on the state level. It's really to be a leader and not be leaving it mostly to the towns and counties to deal with putting in new sewers. Northport Harbor was recently closed for excessive nitrogen, and we also have, not only do we enjoy using our harbors and our beaches, but they really provide a lot of economic money into our district. So we need to be cognizant of that when we deal with all these environmental issues.
Thank you. Mr. Gaughran.
I think we start out, we have to make sure that the state policy recognizes that climate change is not a hoax. And our governor has, after the President of the United States pulled out of the Paris Accords, our governor was very forceful in working with other governors and other municipalities across the state to make sure that we stay as a state within the principles of the Paris Accord. Drinking water is something I've been involved in protecting throughout much of my adult life. With Assemblyman Steve Engelbright, I wrote the Suffolk County Clean Drinking Water Protection Act, which purchased the Central Pine Barrens and other critical watershed areas. And I currently chair the Suffolk County Water Authority, so I'm very knowledgeable in this area. What we need is state funds to municipalities on Long Island so we can reduce the level of nitrates that are getting into the ground, both in terms of expanding and improving sewage treatment systems, as well as incentivizing homeowners to replace their cesspools with basically state-of-the-art mini treatment centers, systems.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellino.
Yes, as chairman of the Environmental Committee, I wrote many of the current environmental laws that protect open space, greenfields, brownfields. I wrote the law that took MTBE out of gasoline. It was designed to make your engine run better, but it's a pollutant, it's a carcinogen, and it fouls your drinking water. We don't need it, we don't want it, and we got rid of it. The pesticide notification law was a law that I wrote to make sure that anybody using these things knows what's going in, knows what's being sprayed on the property next door, and that they can't cross property lines if they do that, to be safe. We have the first in the nation protection of our drinking water, making sure that this $50 billion industry, which is our shoreline, and we are the shoreline, we are the coastline of New York State. So protecting the coastline of New York State, protecting the industry that's evolved here, and protecting the businesses that come here is a key element. We must keep our groundwater clean. We must keep our beaches available to us, because that's what drives our economy, and we must make sure that we don't lose sight of that fact. Protecting open space, protecting green fields, and eliminating these unnecessary pollutants that are being put on us is a key, and I will continue to work hard to make sure that that happens.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
So nitrogen pollution in our harbors is a very serious issue, and it's closely tied with overdevelopment. I'd like to see the state step up in terms of reducing the building of commercial or residential developments on or near DEC-designated wetlands until we can absolutely prove that there is no nitrogen leakage coming from this building. I would also like to see more money coming for more high-tech denitrification systems in homes. And I'd also like to see our storm drains and our sumps be taken very, very carefully. There's a tremendous amount of dumping that's going on. We had a terrible situation very recently in West Hills County Park with dumping. Unfortunately, most of the penalties fall at the town level, and it's generally a sign that says a couple $100 fine. And is that really going to deter someone in the cover of night that can do this discreetly? No, I don't think so. So I think that the state needs to step up and make sure that pollutants are not getting into our storm drains and our aquifer recharge basins. I'd also like to know what we're spraying on Suffolk County. Suffolk County sprays over 20,000 acres of estuarial marshes with methoprene every year. Methoprene is meant to kill mosquitoes. However, it has the unintended side effect of killing crabs, shrimp, lobsters. The lobsters pretty much we've all killed in the late 90s, late 80s, early 90s. Connecticut banned the use of methoprene several years ago. I'd like to see New York do the same.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Raia, next round starts with you. Voting rights. New York voter turnout is among the lowest in the nation. Other states have increased voter turnout by allowing early voting, same-day registration, and no-excuse absentee ballots. Would you support these or other measures to increase voter access?
One of my favorite days of the year is when the league comes into my office and we discuss these. Yes, you're both laughing, but we discuss these and have a spirited conversation on it. Let's start with no excuse absentee ballots. That's the easiest way to get early voting. I've been denied my right to vote absentee ballot because I was working in Montauk. Well, Montauk's pretty far away. It's halfway to Albany. So let's eliminate the excuses. What better way can there be to vote than sitting in the comforts of your own home with the computer screen in front of you, looking and comparing the records of the two people that you have a choice to vote for? Early voting, I don't necessarily have a problem with it as long as we fund it. There's plenty of local governments, particularly upstate, that don't have the resources to open up polling places. But while we're also at it, I have a major concern with respects to voting in our schools. The one day a year that you don't have to show ID to come into our schools is on Election Day. You have primaries, you have special elections. I think there should be a law, I'm sponsoring it, that would require you to show ID to get into the school, not necessarily to vote.
Mr. Rosen.
This is so easy to fix. I mean, Texas figured it out, okay? I mean, they've been voting for 3 days in Texas. They figured it out. And we're like 46th in the country in voter participation. You've got a problem with people coming to the schools. Do 4 days of early voting and do it over the weekend. If you don't want to show an ID, you come in on the weekend. If you don't mind showing an ID, if you don't mind showing it, you come in on the Monday and Tuesday. This isn't rocket science. And, you know, no excuse absentee ballots. That's great until the Republican Commissioner of Elections decides not to let you have them, which is what we've been facing for the last 2 days. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but please hold on that
Save my
because
time.
new things came through this afternoon. The League's been talking to the commissioners all day, so I'll wait till everyone's responded on the question.
Okay,
first.
so I jumped a question? All right, then I'll stop. So anyhow, this to me, you know, the funniest thing is the one time I was not allowed to vote that I didn't get back was when I worked for a federal judge, because she didn't have to let me out and I worked in the city. And the only time in like 1984 that I missed an election. And, you know, it really made me angry, and there should have been another way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Flanagan.
Yeah, at one point in my tenure in the Senate, I got to chair the Election Law Committee, and one of the laws that I passed was about campaign disclosure requirements, which doesn't necessarily have anything to do with voting. I don't support same-day registration. I do support no-excuse absentee voting. And I think what we need to do is drive voter awareness. We also have to be mindful of the fact that this is a heavy, heavy cost to local governments. This is a very expensive proposition. Every time you add a day, you add tens of millions of dollars to the cost. People may say they don't care, but for the districts that we all represent or want to represent, we have a much higher voter turnout than many other parts of the state. Voter turnout in the city of New York, even the last mayoral election, was abysmal. Voter turnout in the district that I represent in a presidential year will be at least 75 to 80%. I think voting is not only a right, but a privilege. So we take this very seriously. We deliberate on these issues, and I do think there should be voter integrity. We have to protect against fraud. I remember chairing the committee, and my colleagues who were Democrats were absolutely and unalterably opposed to having to show any form of ID whatsoever. I think that's wrong. I think it undermines the process. And if you have to show a license in other places or a photo ID that's proper, there's no reason in the world why you shouldn't have to do it when you come to vote.
Thank you. Ms. Cleary.
My first day that I went up to Albany to lobby was for expanding voter registration and letting New York vote. I agree that we need to have no excuse absentee voting. My husband, who's a city fireman, had missed a couple of times of voting, and when he had overtime in Queens and wasn't able to get home before the polls closed. I also believe that we should be combining the federal and state and local primaries instead of having two. That should be a cost savings. We should consider using that cost savings to expanding voting dates around the election day, not expanding it for weeks, but maybe for a few days surrounding the days before and after. I also believe that we need to be able to change our parties closer to the primary day. Right now it's October. It's ridiculously early. You have no idea who you want to vote for by the time October comes around. And I really think it should be more flexible. I also believe we should have automatic voter registration.
Mr. Gaughran.
I support no excuse absentee ballots. You know, under the current law, if you happen to be a construction worker that gets up before 6 o'clock or a stockbroker gets up before 6 o'clock and has to commute to work, you may not be home by 9 o'clock. And the Senate continues to refuse to allow early voting in this state. And I just think we need to have it. It needs to be passed. You can debate whether it should be 4 weeks or 2 weeks. I think 4 weeks is too far out because I think people will have buyer's remorse. Maybe 2 weeks or at least 8 days with giving you some weekend opportunities. We really need to have early voting. And Mr. Raia and Mr. Flanagan both talked about the costs. So you know what? Let's have the state provide the funding to the municipalities, because I'm against increasing mandates on local governments, and I think spending more state money to allow democracy to flourish is a good investment.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellino.
Early voting, yes, but not too early. Because as was just said, or said by some of the others, there is buyer's remorse on this. After a while, people might say, you know, I voted for so-and-so. I really don't like that vote. Maybe I want to change it. So they want to go back in. No votes that they cast. If you vote early and you cast your vote, those votes are in sealed envelopes and should be that way and should not be opened until the polls close officially on Election Day and not counted. So that if you want to come back, you have the ability to come back to the polling place where you vote and say, look, can I have my envelope back? Because I'm going to vote now in person. I've changed my mind. And you should be able to get that vote. No excuse absentee balloting, absolutely. You shouldn't have to provide an excuse. If you want to vote absentee, vote absentee. Nothing should stop. Votes should be not counted until the end of the election day. We've said that all of a sudden. And it's an interesting point, but approximately 50% of those eligible to register, those eligible to vote are actually registered to vote. 50%. That's amazing. And of that 50%, less than 40% actually vote. We need to increase participation. That means we got to get into our schools and inculcate that into our educational system and tell our young people and get them to the point where they are going to vote, want to vote, and are eager to vote. Exercising the franchise is key to keeping this country free and great.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
I absolutely support weekend voting. I support early voting as well, like we said, not too early. I think that automatic registration is a good thing. I believe that we should be able to switch parties easily, more easily than is currently allowed. I think that combining primary days is a great way to save money. It's a great way to save some time as well. Something that hasn't been noted that I'd like to note, the governor recently allowed convicted sexual predators to come into our schools to vote. I'm vehemently against this. I think that they should stay far away from our schools. And as it's been said before, I believe that showing ID is not a bad thing. The third world and second world, you know, in Mexico and India, they have voter ID laws. And, you know, I think bringing those here is not bad. If you need to show ID, perhaps to, you know, buy an alcoholic beverage at the 7-Eleven, what's the problem with showing ID to vote?
Mr. Stern?
Our vote is our voice. And so it is disturbing that during the 2016 presidential election, New York was 41st in the entire country in voter participation, and that's because of the archaic voting system that we've had for far too long. I strongly support early voting, consolidated elections, and so we're not having congressional primaries in June, but state primaries in September, and then general elections in November, and all the special districts that go on all throughout the year. It would be far more economical to bring all of those elections under one roof on the same day. I love the idea of weekend voting. I would love to be able to bring my children on a weekend day and spend time down at the polls and talk about the experience of voting and having them see that on a consistent basis, watching it happen. No excuse, absentee, of course, that is critically important. I remember very well in the 2017 cycle, several of my friends who were commuters to the city lost the opportunity to vote that year because of trouble on the LIRR. That's not acceptable. And yes, going forward, allowing more people to participate, not less, is the direction that we need to move in.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Rosen, the next set will start with you. And in the interest of time, I'm combining a few things here. Gun control, school safety, and gang violence, MS-13. If you were elected to the Assembly, what initiatives would you be looking for? What would you support or introduce, or what's working?
Thank you. I was hoping that would be the question I got. Well, hopefully next year, or I think definitely next year, even though Mr. Flanagan's agreed with me a couple of times, when he's not the speaker, we'll actually get the red flag law passed. And we will have the ability to go in
trespassing and loitering. We passed a whole series of bills that are good, common sense, practical bills that protect children, that protect students, that protect educators, and goes after the bad guys. We had no partner. No partner in the governor, no partner in the Senate Democrats, no partner in the Assembly Democrats. With regard to gang violence, the problem we have, it's not funding. You can provide the requisite funding. You need to go after the people who are creating the problems. You need to enhance the penalties and, frankly, go after the bad guys and have much more of a focus on the criminals who are killing people and maiming people in society, and stop worrying about their rights before the taxpayers and law-abiding citizens.
Ms. Cleary?
So this weekend I attended 2 gun safety events. One was in front of Senator Flanagan's office, calling him to pass the red flag law, or ERPO. And the second was a celebration in the life of Scott Beagle, who was killed in Parkland. I'm a firm supporter of the red flag laws. The red flag laws allowing family members and police officers and district attorneys to request court orders to prevent someone who's harmful to themselves or to others from purchasing or owning guns. Similar legislation was passed in Florida less than a month after the Parkland massacre. Had it been in place at the time, there would have been an avenue for people to come in and take those guns away from the gunmen. I am a strong advocate of gun control. I'm also an advocate of school safety. I don't believe that we need to have armed guards in our schools, but we do need to make our schools safer. And as to gun violence, I think we need to give our police officers all the tools that they need, including the ability to have Spanish-speaking interpreters who are able to find out what is happening into the communities, because more funding for guns is not just going to help our police. They need to be able to talk to the residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gaughran?
Wow, I got to try to get all this within 1 minute. Red flag law. Another law being stopped because the Senate refuses to allow it to a vote. And it's got nothing to do with gun rights. I've spoken to members of the NRA. I've knocked on a lot of doors. And when I explain to them that all this law does is says that if a person is deemed by a judge to say that they may use a gun to harm themselves or somebody else, then the judge, after giving this person due process, will take that gun away from them only on a temporary basis. And that is just such common sense. We need to ban bump stocks. We need a 10-day waiting period when you go and purchase a gun, because right now the federal 3-day waiting period is not working. If they don't get the information in 3 days, people in New York walk out with guns. We need to fund money to school districts for school safety. I don't support arming teachers, but I think we need to do a lot more with technology, and it should be up to the school district itself as to how they think they need to protect their schools. And I fought against gang violence when I was a county legislator. I will do it as a state senator. We need more money from the state to help our local police.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellino?
I received an F rating from the NRA because of my vote for the SAFE Act, which is the strongest gun control act in the country. We need safe schools. I'm not in favor of arming school guards. I'm not in favor of putting more guns in schools. We don't need shootouts in schools. We don't need armed people coming out and doing that sort of thing. We want to keep guns out of the schools so that they remain free and safe for the kids that are in them. I think it's imperative that we work to maintain the safety of our schools and to maintain the fact that people who have guns are capable of handling them. We don't want the mentally ill to have guns. We want to make sure that people who are involved in sexual harassment cases or gender violence get the guns removed under due process, temporarily removed, get them back when the courts determine it's okay, but don't just put them in the schools. Don't let people in the schools have guns, because that's where the problems will start. Keep guns out of schools. Keep the schools safe from gun violence. That's a key element. And as I said before, I'm proud of the fact I got an F rating from the NRA because of my vote for the SAFE Act.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
As it's been said prior, New York does have the strictest gun laws in the nation. In fact, it's right on Governor Cuomo's commercial. That being said, I do support the red flag law. I think that anybody that is demonstrated that they're a danger, that they're mentally ill, should not have access to a firearm, and at least on a temporary basis until it's proven that they're capable. Regarding school safety, as probably, again, the closest one to the public school system, we had a school resource officer in my high school. His name was Officer Drew. He did have a firearm on him. However, him being there made me feel safe. The fact that somebody was on site, available to respond to any threat of violence without having to call someone or waiting for a response, that he's there and ready to act, made me feel safer. It's a double-edged sword. On the other side of that, he's identifying students that are going down the wrong path, that are going towards gangs, crime, drugs. He's identifying them because he sees them in the schools and then out on the streets as well. And he's able to familiarize himself with them, establish a rapport, get them on the right track, and let them know that the police are not your enemy. They're your friend, they're people, and they're here to help you and protect you. So I don't believe in arming teachers, but I do believe in expanding school resource officers programs and bringing more armed, active law enforcement that we trust to protect our streets, to protect our children while they're outside of schools, into the schools themselves, so we don't have to wait for the response, that they're there and they're ready to act.
Thank you. Mr. Stern?
Gun safety and protecting our children and our teachers while they're at school is the moral issue of our time. One of my very best friend's son was a student at Parkland. His best friend was murdered in the classroom right next door. He heard it happen, and he will never be the same. I am a strong supporter of reasonable gun sense safety measures, universal background checks, banning high-capacity magazines and weapons of war off of our neighborhood streets. I am a very proud co-sponsor of the red flag legislation that passed the New York State Assembly in just the few short weeks that I was there before the end of the session, as an important way to keep guns out of the hands of those that pose a danger to all of us and should not have them. I am very proud that in just a short period of time I was able to bring home our fair share from Albany and hundreds of thousands of dollars distributed to our area schools for them to utilize for the most high-tech security measures as a way to harden our schools and keep our children, our administration, and our teachers safe.
Thank you. Mr. Raia.
Thank you. I think it was John Kerry, when he was running for president, who said he voted no before he voted yes. I get elected to represent a district. That district 16 years ago was very conservative. Over the years, it has become a much more moderate district. My voting record reflects that change. This year, I don't know how I got a B- because I voted for a whole bunch of bills that I thought were going to get me an F. That being said, red flag, well, you tell me if you don't like any of these, and I'll be happy to change my vote. Red flag law, I voted for. Got to keep guns out of the mentally ill. Domestic abusers should not own guns. Any out-of-state person that applies for a pistol permit in New York State should have to go through their records check with the state that they came from. I voted to extend the 3-day background check, NICS check, to a 10-day background check. I am a sportsman, and I know the intricate workings of guns, and when we do something that looks good and sounds good, but in the end doesn't do what you want it to do, I will vote against that every time and let you know it. Sensible gun control all the time, as long as there is due process.
Mr. Rosen, 30 seconds.
You're just going to have to go online and you're going to have to look at the record, all right? Because and I'm glad that he's evolved and he's getting there, but again, you need someone to lead in this area. I have a wife who works in the school district. We've had to have the what-if conversation. It's not a conversation you should ever have to have. You know, what are you going to do if someone comes in with a gun? Are you going to hide? Are you going to jump in front of someone? What are you going to do? My sister's kids, though they were older, all went to Parkland also, and they had friends who died there. This is one of the main issues that got me to run, because I have grandkids, and you know, if you worry about your own kids, but when you have grandkids, boy, you really worry about them because you're not in control at all of what's going to happen to them. So the one reason I'm doing this is to try and make it safer for them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to clarify the point I interrupted you both on earlier. There was an article, for those that didn't hear about it, in today's Newsday about a problem with getting absentee ballots. The league had multiple conversations on the telephone with both commissioners and their staffs, and apparently there will be another article tomorrow in Newsday clarifying some of the issues that were brought up. They are going to be processing them. It is a two-part process, and the article didn't really clarify a lot of that. You apply before you get the ballot, and also because, as I think we stated somewhere tonight, the primaries are spread out throughout the year, that September state and local primary led to a delay in getting the ballot certified, which then led to a delay in getting the absentee ballot together. So unfortunately, like storms, a lot of bad things came together, but I believe both commissioners and their staffs are basically going to serve as they do to process the ballots on the schedule that is already posted, and they have extra hours for people to drop them off, and all of that will be online as well. Okay, so closing statements will go in this order again, but I do have a question that I hope you all talk about as you do your closing statement. New York State has a terrible reputation. Our government, not just voter turnout, but our government is viewed as more corrupt, more, well, I should say, less able to come up and introduce, let alone vote on and pass legislation. If you're an incumbent, talk about how things will be different if you're reelected. If you are a challenger, talk about what changes you will help put into place. And as a result, talk about why each of you should win your election. So, Mr. Flanagan, you start. We're going down this way again.
Starting down there?
Nope. Nope.
And that's 1 minute.
1 minute.
Okay. I'm very proud to have had the opportunity to serve for the period of time that I have, particularly as a Long Island senator and as the majority leader. My name has been invoked on a number of occasions. I work very closely with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, have proven that we know how to lead and govern, even with a difficult governor who pushes very hard. The governor has been very stridently opposed to a wide variety of measures that we've passed that deal with transparency, disclosure, pay-to-play, database for deals. The Senate has a litany of bills that we have passed that have not been taken up by the Assembly, that have not been proposed by the governor, have not been supported by the governor. So when we focus on things, I'll stand on our record on what we've done. In terms of my own record, I look forward to the opportunity to try and serve again. These are challenging jobs. I still love my job. I have the interests of Long Island at heart. I've worked every single day to make sure that we get proper funding for economic development, for real jobs, keep the property tax cap, institute a state spending cap, deal with issues like opioid and heroin addiction, quality of life, the environment here on Long Island, making sure that what is important to the people that I've had the opportunity to represent not only continues but gets enhanced. I believe working with Senator Marcellino and my colleagues in the Republican delegation, if we have that opportunity, we will do the best for the people of Long Island. And I want to thank the League of Women Voters.
Thank you. Ms. Cleary.
Yes, hi. I'm not sure if I mentioned earlier, but I'm a first-time candidate. And the reason that I decided to run was Senator Flanagan has been my representative for 20 years, and there are many things that he is holding up that I disagree with and many of his constituents disagree with. The Women's Reproductive Health Act, the red flag laws, the Child Victims Act, among a few, but there are many others. And I think we need to have a change. If we decide that we're happy with the way things are going, then you can elect Senator Flanagan again so he can add to his 32 years up in Albany. But if you want somebody who wants to bring change, who sees our district from inside the district, not from up in Albany, then I ask for your vote. I think that we need to do a full host of campaign finance reforms, including lowering the contribution rate of $11,000 and also opening it up to the LLC loophole where people are able to donate money and you do not know where the money is coming from. I think that leads to a lot of ethical issues that we have up in Albany. Another thing I would also say is that we need to open up and have some more transparency into the way that our government contracts are funded.
Thank you. Mr. Gaughran.
Well, a political figure from the past that I admire is our former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tip O'Neill, and he would always tell the story that he used to mow Mrs. O'Leary's lawn when he was a kid who lived across the street from him, and he still lived across the street from her, and he lost his first election, and he found out that Mrs. O'Leary voted against him because he never asked for her vote. So I'm humbly asking for your vote. Two things happened today. Senator Skelos was sentenced, and we have pipe bombs that are around our country because of all the rhetoric that is going on. So we need real ethics reform in Albany. I will fight real hard for it. I will make sure it gets to the Senate floor. Got to eliminate the LLC loophole so that you can't have unlimited amount of campaign funds that are going into the system. And with civility, I think we all have to work together. We need to go back to bipartisanship, to everybody, not questioning the other person's motives every single day, but just saying, you know, we can disagree on things, but where can we work together and as a state try to move forward? And I thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you. Mr. Marcellino.
Anyone engaged in corrupt behavior must be removed from the legislature, punished, thrown out of office, and if necessary, they go to jail. That is intolerable. And it has occurred on both sides of the aisle. Unfortunately, people sometimes get tempted and they do the wrong thing. We've got to make sure that there's complete openness and transparency in contributions. You should be able to know who's contributing and how much. There should be no limit to the disclosure. It should be immediate. It should be online. It should be easily found out. There should be no problem for the people out there, my constituents, to know exactly who's contributing to my campaign and how much and how often. That's a must, and I support that sort of thing. I thank all of you for coming tonight because you care, you want to hear, you want to listen, and you want to learn. And I appreciate the fact that you're here, giving up your time to listen to us. And the job isn't finished. You don't pass 100 environmental laws, 275 different laws, without working across the aisle, without working with members of the other party. I've developed those relationships. I will continue to develop those relationships so that I can produce and perform in your interests, because I know that I work for you. You're my boss. Well, my wife is my boss. and that's unchangeable. But you come a close second. So therefore, I want to be able to go back there. I want to go back and continue the work that I've been doing. And with your help, I hope to go back on November 6th.
Thank you. Mr. Williams.
Thank you very much. Albany is broken. Long Island is unaffordable. We have the highest property taxes in the nation. We have the highest state and local taxes in the nation. Some very common sense solutions. A permanent 2% property tax cap. Don't give us a break. Come on. We've got the highest in the country. Don't push it up any further. A permanent moratorium on any new unfunded state mandates. In the last 18 years, we were hit with over $140 billion in state mandates so that Albany could say, oh, we're not spending that much. They're forcing the spending onto the towns, the counties, and to the local school districts. Regarding corruption, I believe in term limits. I believe in the limiting of outside income, and I believe in making sure that we are very transparent in who's financing campaigns. I'm going to be a full-time legislator. I don't have my own law practice. I don't have a law degree. I don't have my own business, and I have no obligation other than to the voters and to the taxpayers of my district. The reason I'm running for my little sister, who I want to make sure that she has the opportunity to stay on Long Island, to buy a home, to find a job here. I'm running for my grandmother, who I think deserves to stay in her house, to be able to pay the property taxes on a limited income. I'm running for the small business that wants to stay here. I'm running for the next generation of Long Islanders, because we're here. We'd like a voice. We'd like to be at the budget table. We'd like to make sure that we have a say in the stewardship of our environment, and we'd like to make sure that we have a say in the future of New York. I thank you, and I ask you only for a chance.
Thank you. Mr. Stern.
You don't get rid of the corruption unless you get rid of the money. That's in politics. When I served in the legislature, I actually helped write the new county ethics code, which has been held up as a model for other jurisdictions to follow. And so I look forward to the opportunity to go back to Albany and play a leadership role on bringing real, meaningful, strong ethics reform to Albany. I'm very proud of my record. In just a short period of time, and the legislative initiatives that I was able to pass, and the resources that I was able to bring back, whether it was for school safety, law enforcement to protect our communities, and money for our schools. But I'm most proud of my accessible and responsive leadership that has helped so many in our community in really such a meaningful way. For example, this is a letter I love to read. Dear Mr. Stern, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for all of your help. I just learned that my mother's home care assistance will be restored. She's 92 with dementia, and I'm her only caregiver. This assistance will ensure her safety and give me some rest and peace of mind. This would not have happened without you. It is wonderful to know that I have a public official who truly cares. That's why I'm running for re-election, and I hope to have your continued support on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Raia.
Thank you. Cleaning up Albany's culture of corruption still remains one of my top priorities. I'm a full-time legislator. I voted to eliminate pay-to-play donation practices, voted to close the LLC campaign finance loophole, and I oppose allowing corrupt politicians to use their campaigns to finance their criminal defense. I didn't get a chance to talk about the local level, but I've delivered for the district. Just in the last 2 years, securing over $1 million for sewer and flooding repairs in Northport, hundreds of thousands of dollars in discretionary funding for our libraries, fire departments, and parks. I also worked directly with Governor Cuomo to keep trucks and buses out of the LIE rest stop in Dix Hills to keep them from idling 24 hours a day, plus a constant police presence 24 hours a day there. Unfortunately, the political discourse in our country is at an all-time low, but I'm very proud of my bipartisan working relationship with all of my colleagues, no matter the level of government. In fact, according to Newsday's endorsement of my campaign, they say, ask Long Island's Assembly Democrats which Republican really hustles to get things done, and the name you will often hear is Andrew Raia, working the angles, whether it's in Albany or in the district, to be an effective legislator. I ask for your vote so I can continue serving you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Oh, hold on. And I want to thank my opponent, Avrum Rosen, who's been a true gentleman, and we've actually really enjoyed our company together.
Stealing my thunder again. I was actually going to say to everyone that with everything that's going on, whether it's the governor's debate or whether it's in Washington, I think it's nice to see that there can be civil discourse, at least on the local level, and maybe we can teach them something. To answer your question about what I would do, I have a couple of things. There are ethics laws out there that need to be passed. There are oversight laws that need to be passed that both sides have not signed on. I think both Andy and I have signed on to both of those being passed. I would also, we've got the elephant in the room that no one's talking about. I would support depoliticizing redistricting, which is going to happen in the next assembly. All right, because if you look at our district, it's ridiculous. I can't even explain to people how it gets where it gets to. I also think there has to be a way to getting away from the 3 men in a room. I think there has to be a way to take the power away from both the speakers, with no offense to Mr. Flanagan, but to allow people, when they have members who want to bring bills to the floor over their objection, that it can be brought, that 3 people cannot just control what the people get to vote on. I ask, you've gotten a feel for what I'm about. I ask for your support, and I would ask for your vote so that I can bring some of this energy and ideas to Albany. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you all very much. And thank you to Five Towns College. This has been a wonderful venue, and I hope to see more of it in the League of Women Voters of Huntington. And make sure you all bring your colleagues and friends and neighbors to vote.